south of the border, down Mexico way. That's where I fell in love when the stars above came out to play. And now as I wander...
Hello there, all you expat wannabes. I'm Johnny Mueller, and you're listening to the Expat Files, Living in Latin America, the show that tells you just what it's like to live, work, play, and or retire down here in Latin America. It's a mix of the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great, and it's all right here, so let's get started.
All right, now for some news that probably never made it up to the States. First, let's talk about Latin American banks. Now, you've heard me say on this show many times before that Gringos and Expats absolutely need a Latin American bank account. And now, thankfully, almost all Latin American banks have a dollar and a peso or local funny money account. And every bank has online banking now. So what you do, for example, let's say you got Social Security or a pension payment, comes in dollars to your Latin American bank, direct deposit, lands in your U.S. dollar account, normally with no charges or fees, as long as it's a direct deposit and not a wire transfer where they'll take at least $60 out of every transfer if you do a direct wire transfer through the SWIFT system, which is okay, I guess, if you're only doing a wire transfer once in a while, but every time it'll cost you at least $60. You know, that was one of the reasons they invented Bitcoin. But as for dough that you might get on a continuous basis like a pension payment, you don't. Want to let it accumulate in your U.S. bank account till you've got a certain amount and then wire transfer it down to your Latin American bank account because you'll pay that $60 every time. And you know, signing up for direct deposit to a Latin bank is easy. Once it's done, it's done. Your dough will arrive like clockwork, but maybe a day late, but not much more. The thing is, you see, when you finally made it down to your Latin American country of choice, except for Panama, Salvador, Ecuador, and Belize, they use U.S. dollars. You'll have to buy everything in your country with the local country's funny money. That includes paying utility bills, too. So that means once your U.S. dollars arrive in your U.S. dollar account in your Latin bank, you'll have to little by little switch your dollars over to your funny money account within the same bank, of course, and then do what a lot of gringos do. Go to the local cash machine, pull out the pesos or doubloons, whatever, to have some, walking around spending money. By the way, your U.S. dollar and your local funny money account will have a debit card attached, so you can use that around town for purchases too. Now, as for me, I rarely use my debit cards. I just don't like the idea of merchants and restaurants and stuff having my numbers, so I always go to the cash machine, pull some cash out, and pay for everything in cash, or almost everything in cash. Though sometimes you absolutely have to use one, like checking into a hotel. But, using cash is a very good way to stay almost anonymous too. Now, when you're in your Latin country of choice, you'll want to use the debit card connected to your funny money account. Pesos, bolivars, doubloons, colones, whatever. Not the debit card attached to the U.S. dollar account. Well, you could use it. They'll take it because it's usually a Visa or MasterCard. But then there'll be a small currency conversion charge. So use your funny money debit card within your Latin country and your U.S. dollar debit card that's attached to your dollar account when you're outside the country where they accept dollars. Though, as mentioned, you could use either card because it'll be a Visa or MasterCard. You have a choice, though. Why subject yourself to extra charges if you don't have to? Now, the really good thing is that you could do all your banking online here in Latin America and almost all Latin American banks. However, about 80% of all Latin American banks have their websites only in Spanish. And that's one of the biggest complaints I get from gringos and expats. They get flummoxed, even stressed out when they're on the website trying to do their stuff in Spanish. In fact, I know a lot of expats who just keep on copying and pasting whatever messages and notes they have on the bank's website. They're forever doing the Google Translate thing, which is a pain in the ass. I even occasionally get roped into translating bank statements for friends of mine myself. But there's light on the horizon. More and more Latin banks have a dual language choice. Click this box for English. In fact, one of the most highly recommended banks to use in Guatemala for gringos and expats, Banco Industrial, has just created that option. It's that bank I've spoken about in the past that has that very, very good health insurance plan, actually plans, they've got a number to choose from, that you automatically are eligible for once you've opened up a bank account there. The only kicker is you have to be a resident of Guatemala to open a bank account there. So you have to have applied for or have your permanent residency already. Sure, there are a lot of other good banks in Guatemala. And throughout Central and South America, most of them have an insurance plan you can get on once you open an account. But Banco Industrial, also known by just the initials BI, has one of the best health insurance plans I've seen that you can instantly sign up for without taking a physical. You've got that option just for opening up an account. Anyway, just last week I got the great news that Banco Industrial now has an English website. For the first time, you can get on that site and do all your transactions and read all the notes and comments and all the bulletins in English. So what's not to like about that? And man, I'll tell you, so many gringos and expats I know who use that bank have been waiting and waiting for the day when that would happen. And you know, the administration at Banco Industrial has been saying for the last couple of years now, they're going to have the website in English. Of course, you know, everything in Latin America works on mañana time, so no one was really holding their breath. But hey, they finally did it. Now, I'm only mentioning this because, like I said, Banco Industrial has that great insurance plan, and many gringos and expats, and many who come down to my seminar, really want to get on that plan. But as mentioned, you have to be a permanent resident. Meanwhile, there are some other banks where you don't have to be a resident to get an account. And if you come down to my Expat Insider seminar, our seminar lawyer can take you down to one of those banks and open an account for you. And they, too, have insurance plans that you could get on right away once you've signed up. But most all of them fall short when you compare their health insurance plans to the Banco Industrial plan. Now, many gringos and expats who make it down, get their plan B going, they're working on their residency, but it doesn't come through for a year or even more. So in the meantime, they get a bank account at one of the other banks that doesn't require that you have residency. And they shop around for a private health insurance plan through a broker. And for $75 or $100 or $150 a month, you could get a fantastic private health insurance plan. But they'll have an age limit, generally from 59 to 64 years old, depending on the plan. If you're older than that, you can't apply. And you'll have to take a physical, blood test, and all that stuff, unlike the insurance plans offered by banks. So keep that in mind, all you guys and gals out there who've got many pre-existing conditions. Though you've heard me say this before, you do not have to be very truthful when you fill out the application form. That's what they tell me anyway. Still, for example, if let's say you've had a knee replacement, diabetes, or heart stents, I'm thinking you'd have to put that on the form because that stuff would definitely show up when you're getting your physical. But generally, you know, since we all absolutely want to get accepted for the policy, we'll skip over certain things and conditions we think just might disqualify us. Now, I'm not saying you should lie on the form or leave things out, but know this. Many people do because they know the people who are reviewing your papers at the insurance office don't speak English, and they're never going to call your doctor back in the States and ask them about your medical problems or chronic conditions. Besides that, your doctor back home probably doesn't speak Spanish. The fact is, no one's ever going to check back with a doc or a hospital back in the States to review your conditions. Consequently, most gringos and expats here in Latin America applying for health insurance leave out a ton of stuff when they apply for insurance here. Again, I'm not advising you to lie or leave things out. I'm just telling you what many smart, astute expats do. By the way, if you hear some construction noise in the background, that's exactly what it is. Sorry about that. I'm not in a studio with an isolation booth. And hammer drills blasting on concrete. Well, that sound will penetrate almost anything. All right, let's take an email. This is from Hannibal. He says, Johnny, what's that water filter setup you keep talking about? I know you're talking about using it in Latin America, but there's tons of messed up crap here in the U.S. water as well. All right, Hannibal, let's address that right now. I'll send my water setup over to you right now, Hannibal. Then he says, Johnny, are you not concerned about inheritance taxes in Guatemala when recommending it for a second passport or residency? I looked it up. It seems a bit steep at 7% when Belize has none. No inheritance tax at all. So then, Johnny, why not get and stay on the residence permit forever by visiting Guatemala once a year? In other words, never get your passport. All right, H, good questions. But let me point out a very important thing. You'll find out if you move down here to Latin America. After a while, especially if you speak Spanish, you'll find out that almost no one pays inheritance taxes. So it doesn't matter if it's 0%, 7%, or 50%. It's just a non-issue. So then you might ask, how's that possible? Well, it's because, you see, Latinos with substantial properties and assets, they put that stuff in an S.A. or L.L.C. corporation. And then when someone dies, they just hand the corporation over, the kids, the wife, whatever. I'm talking about the corporate shares. If you have the shares, you're the owner. In that way, no one's liable for inheritance taxes. In fact, that's one of the most common uses of an S.A. or L.L.C. corporation. You put your land, your boat, your house, your apartment, your airplane, sometimes even your car if it's a nice, expensive one. In effect, you've got that S.A. or L.L.C. corporation owning that stuff. Not you personally, but you own the corporation, so in effect, it's yours. You just hand over the corporate paperwork to whoever you want to give it to, or you put it in your will that the corporation goes to so-and-so, And because there's been no ownership change in the National Registry, no one's liable for taxes. It's totally 100% legal. Oh, and that's another great way to sell a house and not accrue property transfer taxes. You know, in most countries, when you sell a house, you have to pay a percentage of the total to the government. Take Honduras, for example. I think it's 3.5%. So if you buy something for $100,000, at closing, you pay the Honduran government $3,500. However, if the property you're buying or selling is in an S.A. or L.L.C. corporation, at closing, you just hand over the corporate papers to the new guy. The seller signs over the shares of the corporation to the new guy, the buyer, and that's it. No tax liability. And believe it or not, with many transactions like that, the corporate documents don't even get re-registered at the municipality. They just end up with you along with the shares or in a file at your lawyer's office. And you know, Hannibal, we talk a lot about that kind of stuff at my Expat Insider seminar. In fact, our seminar lawyer spends quite a few hours explaining all those kind of machinations, and they're all completely legal. Now, that's not to say all that stuff is legal in the States. It's not. But it's absolutely legal here in Latin America. And now an email from Chris. He says, Johnny, do you use ferrite beads or any anti-EMF protection for health reasons? I put ferrite beads myself, he says, on my AirTube headset and headphones. What else should I be putting those beads on, do you think? Will they help health-wise on my laptop, router, or television cords? Thanks. Signed, Chris. All right, Chris, but maybe some of our listeners don't know what you're talking about. Well, he's talking about cutting down on EMF radiation that comes from all electronic devices. The good news is that many electronic devices put out minuscule quantities of dirty EMF, with numbers so low that meters can hardly read them. But there are some devices that really kick out the dirty EMF, and you're getting bombarded all the time if you're sitting close to some of that stuff or wearing some of that stuff. Like, for example, if you're using Bluetooth headphones and that smartphone, you really are bombarding your head with a lot of radiation that can't be good for you. Same thing if you're living within a couple of blocks of a cell tower. Now, these little anti-EMF ferrite beads Chris is talking about, they're actually little clip-on magnets. You probably have seen them on the cords of some of your electronic equipment, like your TV or your computer. People wonder, what the hell's that? And what's it doing? Well, you see that little ferrite ball blocks and filters some of the higher radio frequency noise. Because you see, EMF noise loves long wires, like the wires attached to your computer and power cords and earbuds. And those little clip-on ferrite balls block that stuff. Though with anything, you could go overboard. And here's my suggestion, Chris, because I'm all into protecting against that kind of radiation. In fact, you probably heard on my very last show about those cheap and dirty EMF Faraday cage filter bags that I bought to store some of my spare electronic equipment, spare computer, backup hard drives, stuff like that. In case of an errant solar flare, which would produce a nice big EMP pulse. That could happen at any time when we've got no control over it. Except, we're going to have advanced warning. What people don't know is that EMP pulses from the sun don't travel at the speed of light. They're slower. So there's a good chance we'll have 1 to 3 hours notice before one of those big, very damaging ones strikes the earth. And that should give you enough time to pull out some of those empty Faraday cage EMF bags, the ones I spoke about on the last show. Then you could shove your laptop, smartphone, hard drives, walkie-talkies, routers, whatever, in those bags. And when that pulse hits, they won't be affected. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Johnny, you're way out there now. I never heard of a solar mass ejection or gigantic solar flare EMP pulse doing any damage. To which I say, just look it up. There have been some very localized cases, like up in Canada, where the whole grid came down. That was in the late 90s. Luckily, they were able to reroute the grid through the U.S. because that area wasn't affected. But you see, that was a localized EMP. I'm talking about the big one that comes about every 100 years, and we're overdue. The big ones, you know, and you can look this up, can and will take out the grid for an entire continent. The problem is, what's at risk is the big multi-million-dollar transformers. And, you know, engineers and analysts say they will blow. And since it takes a couple of months to make them, they're handmade. Guess where? In China. There are no such manufacturing facilities in the States anymore. Isn't that nice? That means unless there's a lot of extra ones on hand, there's going to be big trouble in River City and Cleveland. But you knew that already. Well, some of you did anyway. Oh, and besides the fact that dozens of those huge transformers will get blown, every little piece of electronic equipment that's attached to a cord will most likely fry too, unless you've got it protected in a Faraday cage or completely disconnected from the cord, you see, because the cord becomes an amplifying antenna for the EMP. So it's your call to be prepared or not. I am, and like I said, for under $50, I got a huge assortment of heavy-duty Faraday cage bags. Hey, it's cheap insurance, right? But as to Chris's question, he says, do you use ferrite beads or any anti-EMF protection for health reasons yourself? Do you, Johnny? Well, you longtime listeners have heard me mention many times that I have an EMF meter, a very good one. It cost me slightly over $100 on Amazon. There's a lot of models out there, but I've discovered one that's really good for me, and I've been using it a couple of years now. And that, Chris, is the way you tell if there's enough EMF in the area for you to be worried if it could be a possible health hazard. Or you could slap on those ferrite beads on every single cord or wire in your house, which would be kind of nuts, wouldn't it? So as far as EMF protection for me around the house, etc., I did my walkthrough with my meter, and I discovered a couple of places that had very high EMF, including within 10 feet of the microwave oven. Believe me, I keep my distance. In fact, the meter itself is self-adjusting, and it tells you when there's unacceptable levels of radiation, and it's not just using the standards set up by U.S. government agencies. The government would never lie or fudge data, now would they? Knowing that, the meter company, they use tables and measurements from independent radio frequency researchers whose standards are much tighter compared to so-called official U.S. safety standards that independent researchers say are pretty lax. So, Chris, all I can say is you should buy one of those meters, go around your house and find the hot spots. If you have any, distance yourself from it or just rearrange the stuff around the house. For example, you heard me say in a previous show, LED lights that everyone uses now. They put out a ton of dirty EMF, but only if you're 3 foot or closer to the light. As soon as you're 3 feet away, there's almost no reading on the meter. But you get within 1 or 2 feet, man, it's off the charts. Same thing with laptop computers. They named them laptop because you're supposed to put them on your lap. What the rest of the world doesn't know is if it's on your lap, you're screwed. So what do? I have the laptop on a desk about 3 feet in front of me, connected to a big 42-inch monitor. That's plenty big, so it can be a couple of feet away from me. Well, my meter shows that where I'm sitting, there's almost no EMF radiation at all. But again, when I get within 2 or 3 feet of that monitor or the laptop, my EMF meter insinuates that my testicles are being fried. So the thing is, Chris, you just can't guess where the EMF's going to be concentrated. You need to walk around with a meter. Oh, and by the way, here's a question for you. How do you know those little ferrite beads that you clip onto a cord? How do you know they work? Eliminate the dirty RF radio frequencies. Well, it's easy to check if you've got one of those EMF meters. You just put the meter in front of and then behind the clip-on ferrite bead. And believe me, you'll see a big difference. Now, there's another very inexact way to check if it's working. Just use a regular AM radio, a portable one, maybe even the one on your cell phone. When you bring it close to a cable or wire putting out EMF, it'll hiss, white noise, static, which decreases significantly once you clipped on one of those ferrite beads. So yes, those beads do work, and you know what? They weren't developed to protect the health of humans. That wasn't their intention at all. What they do is stop dirty EMF frequencies from entering your computer or your monitor, eliminating glitches and noise you might see on your computer screen or a low buzzing you might hear coming from your audio equipment. So those clip-on ferrite beads really work. Question, are you bored yet? I am, so let's move on. Oh, and here's a revolting development. An entire new industry has grown up in just the past year. It's called the United States COVID-19 Testing Industrial Complex. Just listen to this disturbing article that just came out. It starts by saying, our new industrial COVID testing complex turns out 2 million COVID-19 tests a day, sucking up more annual cash than the revenue generated by Boeing, Intel, FedEx, Facebook, and Target combined, making a few people and organizations very, very rich, largely on the taxpayer's dime. Then it says the cost of a COVID-19 test range anywhere from $20 to $850. The average cost of a COVID test is around $129 in the U.S. And that's just the cost of the test itself. The price range does not include the additional costs, including the cost of the specimen collection and doctor's visit. That puts the current daily total cost for COVID testing in America, not including the additional costs, at $254 million a day. That means the test costs $7.6 billion per month and $91.4 billion a year. And that's just in the States, and it's a worldwide phenomenon. And the real scary thing is that the accuracy problem has not been solved, with up to 40% of the tests showing a false positive or negative. So what's it all mean? Well, with the new COVID testing paradigm, revenue approaching $100 billion a year. That means, predictably, the COVID testing industrial complex is now, and you may have heard this phrase before, too big to fail. Therefore, most probably, like government, cancer, and herpes, it will grow like a weed and have many negative, terrible secondary effects and will never go away. All right, here's a quick email from Zen Juan in Paris, France. Yep. He says, Johnny, any thoughts on Dominican Republic, Jamaica, or Haiti as a plan B destination? That was a short email. I like it. All right, first let's talk about Haiti. Yeah, it's considered part of Latin America. It's connected to the Dominican Republic on the island of Hispaniola. Well, it's an absolute hellhole. I don't care where you are. The power goes out every day, so you're going to need a generator or solar. Garbage pickup is bad, so it stacks up everywhere and stinks to high heaven anywhere you walk. Sure, they've got a nice hotel and business district in Port-au-Prince, but as soon as you get a block or two away, it's super depressing. No way would I ever want to live there. In fact, if I won $1 million resort on the beach in Haiti, I'd sell it the next day. Plus, there's always some kind of civil unrest going on in the streets, since the politicians are absolutely noted for stealing everything. They go well beyond the usual and customary 20% skim. Here in Latin America, the public is used to a certain amount of stealing by every politician. It's tolerable. It's the legacy. It's just the way things are. And I'd have to say a 20% skim is pretty reasonable and customary here in Latin America, except in certain places like Haiti, where the skim is well over 50%. I mean, it's like an African country, really. Oh, and they speak French and their own dialect, so good luck with that. As for Jamaica, well, it's got the thievinest population I know. In fact, a gringo friend of mine had a couple of maquila factories in Kingston. They were well protected in a gated, guarded zona franca, tax-free zone. But still, he said, every month, the local mayor or the local mayor's boys came around to collect a kind of a hidden tax. Basically, it was a protection racket run by the mayor. Now, of course, Jamaica's a big island, has a large population, so it's got some very nice gated, guarded communities and all-inclusive resorts. But man, let me tell you, you don't want to wander too far away from those places, because everyone's out to gouge you. From the tour guide to the taxi driver to the shoe shine boy. Everybody's got an angle, and if you're a gringo or expat, you stick out like a sore thumb, whether you're white or black, Asian or whatever. We Americans have that look and the way we dress, so we're spotted out in a second. Nope, I scratched Jamaica off my list a long time ago. For me, it's not even a good place to visit. You can expect to be hassled and hustled the minute you walk out the airport. Now, as for the Dominican Republic, I've been there quite a few times. I like it. The downside is it's not in the altiplano. It's extremely hot. And because it's an island, just like Jamaica, everything's a bit more pricier than a Latin country on the mainland. Most everything except for basic food items has to be imported. So I'd say it's about 25% more expensive than living in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and the rest of the Latin American countries considered to be off the gringo tourist trail. But again, if you've got the money, you can live anywhere. Oh, and by the way, since Columbus first discovered the island of Hispaniola and set up shop basically in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic, it's a really great place to pop in for a week or two on vacation. It's got a fantastic historical colonial section with tremendous and restored original colonial architecture. But oddly enough, 90% of all the tourists that come to the DR, they never ever get to see the historic district because they fly right into Punta Cana, La Romana, or Bávaro. Those are three little towns on the east coast of the island where all those white sand beaches and hundreds of all-inclusive hotels are located. About 3 hours by car from the historic district in Santo Domingo. So that side of the island's all geared up for tourism, and it's first world expensive too. But as for the rest of the island, besides Haiti, which is on the opposite side, it's livable and cheap enough, though about 25% more expensive than Latin countries on the mainland. However, I've noted that if you live in the Dominican Republic and you're not in a gated guarded community or residential tower, they've got a real petty crime problem. In other words, if you take off for a week or two and don't have someone watching your house, well, you just might come home to find a couple of things missing. Though again, if you're in a gated guarded community or residential tower, that's not an issue at all. But I can tell you one thing, when you talk about the happiness factor, man, the Dominicans have it. I've never seen such happy people. When they're not working, it seems they're always having fun and partying. Yet 90% of them live from hand to mouth and don't have a pot to pee in. Speaking of happiness, here's an email from Nick. No, not Saint Nick, just Nick. He says, Johnny, you talk of happiness in Latin America, how Latinos seem happier and more content and I guess more easygoing compared to many anal and uptight, stressed out Americans. But you see, I think using the word happiness is asking for trouble. Doesn't happiness mean different things to different people? Then he says one of the first persons to analyze happiness was philosopher Aristotle. He said, happiness consists of lasting and justified satisfaction with life as a whole. So in effect, you, by looking at others, can't decide how happy they are. Only they know how happy they are. For example, when someone says to you in a survey or whatever, how happy are you? You might answer, pretty happy. Because in that moment, nothing hurts. You've got no stress. You're probably not working. It's the weekend or after work, whatever. So then what kind of answer would you get if you asked that same person while he was hunched over his punch press machine at the factory at 9 in the morning? So the happiness thing depends on when, where, and how you phrase the question. If someone answers, I'm pretty happy, they might really mean, I'm doing okay and I can't complain. Or they might mean, things are generally a lot worse, but right now, I'm okay. One thing's for sure, even in Latin America, where people seem to be much happier, they almost never answer a question like that by saying, I'm very, very, or extremely happy. That would be an unusual response for anyone. How many people do you know who just seem to be most of the time bubbling over with happiness? That would be extremely rare, unless you caught a manic depressive in his manic state. Then he says, I read somewhere that film and music producer David Geffen, a multi-billionaire, once said in an interview with a sad smile on his face, show me someone who thinks that money buys happiness, and I'll show you someone who's never had a lot of money. He said, show me someone who thinks happiness in old age comes from having been rich or famous, and I'll show you someone who's not old yet. All good points, Nick. You know, that reminds me of what my dear departed grandpa once told me. He said, Johnny, you ever notice how many times in a day you hear people talk about their work? They say, I got to go to work, or after work, or work's a pain, or I like my work, or I can't wait to get out of work. Work, 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 work. You hear that word all the time. And you know, it must have rankled my grandpa such that he pondered it a bit and put some thought into it. And he said, Johnny, if you've never been a miner, a logger, or a farmer, you don't know what work is. By the way, he was a farmer. And man, he was right. I remember when I was around 14 years old. School was out. It was the summer. I was looking to make some money. My mom said, why don't you go work Grandpa's cabbage truck? He was paying $15 a day. That would be around $75 in today's inflated funny money. So I went to the farm and hired on with the Mexican migrant crew. I lasted 2 whole days and had 2 whole weeks of muscle pain.
You've been listening to the Expat Files, Living in Latin America. If you need some help with your own Plan B, we can schedule a one-on-one phone or Skype consult. Just send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. And if you want to get on the waiting list for my next week-long Expat Insider Seminar in Central America, where you're guaranteed to get a 2 to 5 year head start on your Plan B, send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. Nos vemos.